All right, we are live. So Micah Kunkel, Luke Melkelzian, Mason, and Adam Com, thank you guys so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jake.
So for those who don't know, these four guys have been on Jubilee debating, was it Ben Shapiro for Mason and Adam, and Destiny or Stephen Bennell for Micah and Luke. So I wanted to bring the five of us together to discuss DOGE, to discuss DEI, and to discuss immigration and really get to the core of what's going on with this new administration. You hear two conflicting realities about the matter, and I want to ask these four folks here what they think. So, Micah and Luke, have the DOGE cuts been good or bad for the U.S.? Maybe you guys could expand on this for a couple minutes. Like, why do you think what Elon is doing is good or bad for the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and go. I think there's a lot of government waste, and I realize that, like, percentage wise, as far as the deficit goes, we're not making a huge indent in that. But I think, $8 billion saved is $8 billion saved. Like, that's still really good. And so having Elon and a team go through and basically with a fine comb and go through all these things and identify areas of just complete waste of taxpayer money is a good thing. Honestly, this issue kind of shocks me from a Democrat side, why you would even disagree with something like this. Balancing budgets, like going through, finding where you're wasteful in spending, that's just a good thing overall. And just the different things that they've cut, like they found $1.5 million to advance DEI programs in Serbia. Why the heck are we doing something like that? $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. Like, this money that taxpayer dollars that are given to the U.S. government should be used to help American citizens. And these things that they're finding have nothing to do with actually helping American citizens.
Mason, Adam, do you guys agree or disagree with that?
I would say I highly disagree. And just off the bat, I think the main misunderstanding here that seems to be present in the MAGA movement is that the executive branch does not appropriate funds. This is done by Congress. And as we saw today, I mean, MAGA spent 4 years telling us that we're fear-mongering by calling Trump a dictator and authoritarian. He's defying court orders. He's defying the legislature. He's defying both other branches of government. If you have an issue with this grant to Serbia or whatever, that's done by Congress. Call your congressperson. The president does not have the constitutional authority to just randomly pick and choose which laws he does and doesn't want to enforce. And yes, you're going to find some weird grants here and there for a few $1 million out of the $6 trillion that we spend every year. But that's part of the normal deal-making process of Congress. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of weird stuff going to farmers in Idaho or Missouri or whatever too. That's kind of like the wheeling and dealing of Congress. I'm sure there's some fluff in there that we could cut out. I'm on principle not opposed to cutting inefficiency. Inefficiency is obviously a bad thing. But what's actually happening here is this is a way to sort of virtue signal and publicize, like, we're going after the DEI, we're going after the waste. But what they're really doing is they're trying to cut back eventually our benefits and entitlements, even though they're saying they're not going to do that. And secondly, they don't even have the authority to do this in the first place. So I think it's kind of silly to argue on the merits of, are these cuts good or not, because they don't have the authority to make these cuts in the first place.
But that's the second point. And sorry to jump in. I know there's a lot of us here, but I do want to jump in right there. So, Adam, you're bringing up a separate point, which is, like, do they even have the authority? We can get into that, but let's just
I think it's the primary point.
But the question is, are the cuts good or bad? And it sounds like you're in agreement with Micah. You're saying it is okay to cut these things if they are wasteful.
It depends on the things, right? Because, like, when we talk about these grants, these were passed in legislation. So, like, this was already appropriated by Congress. These are things we can change by calling our Congress people. But again, when Congress passes, like, a bill for like $200 billion, the way deal making works to get the votes, get through the filibuster and everything, there's going to be concessions made on each side where you're going to have grants going to people's pet projects and stuff. You can argue that's a bad thing, and maybe it is. But then if you don't have those things present, then these deals are never going to get made. And Trump talks about the art of the deal. Part of the art of the deal is that you're going to have some of these grants that maybe you don't want. But in the grand scheme of things, again, and Micah conceded this, so that's fair, but cutting a few $1 million out of $6 trillion is the equivalent of cutting pennies out of like a 5-figure, 6-figure budget. So I don't know how much we can say this is like efficient versus just virtue signaling from the right.
Yeah, and then my name's Mason. I'm also known as One Hand Politics for those that don't know if you're watching the video or the stream. But I think that there's also just a misunderstanding that this agency is enforcing a lot of these cuts, where it actually is just identifying. And it's interesting to me where they're trying to find and identify where these holes are, which to Adam's point are really just virtue signaling to right wingers who are trying to win the culture war. Like Elon Musk today came over this big conspiracy saying that the Biden administration is paying for luxury hotels for undocumented migrants. That is provably false. Not only were migrants used in certain housing places just because there was a lack of infrastructure in most of the border cities in which they were detained, but the implication here, it's a big Mont and Bailey where, yes, the government was paying for some housing for undocumented migrants. Therefore, the government is either incentivizing people to come here during the Biden administration, or people are fleeing their homes, fleeing their communities because they want to stay in a hotel room in the United States. And that's the incentive for them to go through one of these life-changing, life-threatening actual journeys in order to get to a country that doesn't even treat them with the humanity that they deserve. So for me, it's really an agency that's meant to identify what are buzzwords that we can get our Republican base riled up about instead of where are actual efficient cuts. Because they've said that they want to audit the Pentagon. Let's see if they actually do that. That'd be something that I'm in agreement with because the Pentagon has failed almost every audit that they've done. But until I see some tangible evidence that that's where there is the direction that they're heading, it really is just trying to stir up the culture war.
And Adam, you're saying the fundamental question, and I want to ask Luke this, is I think you're challenging me on the premise of the question I asked, which is, are the cuts good or bad? And what you're saying is that there's something more fundamental than that, which is that the president should not be doing this. Congress should be doing this.
Just to give an analogy to kind of like make my point more clear, like if I had an issue with my car's engine and some random dude broke into my car and started fiddling with the mirrors, I'd be like, he's like, I'm trying to fix your car. Like, first of all, I shouldn't even be in there. Second of all, what you're doing is so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And I do want to add, Musk doesn't have the authority to cut things, but the OMB did freeze funding. And today that was found that
Trump have the authority. So I want Luke to respond to your point, but so just to kind of make it concise. So you're saying that it's illegal for Trump and through him, Elon, to be cutting things? And what's your claim that it's not legal for?
Yeah. So my claim is that Trump is violating the Constitution. He's defying both the legislative and the judicial branch. Number one, by not going in accordance with his oath of office to enforce the laws as they were passed. And number two, it was reported today, a judge has now said, you are defying court order. That hasn't happened in modern history. That is like very authoritarian.
Luke, do you have an opinion on that, whether Trump is violating the Constitution with regards to these cuts?
Something I wanted to touch on is something that we haven't really heard from anybody, and kind of is my argument, and I would say it's a lot of what Americans are looking for, is it's transparency. Americans want to know where our tax dollars are going to, and, if there's anything to gain from this, it's transparency. From both sides, from the left, from the right, there hasn't been as much transparency as we need. But when you really look into this, I know Micah touched a little bit on it, but we sent $50 million to Gaza for condoms. Like, what American wants their tax money going to that? We've spent millions of dollars promoting and pushing an LGBTQ agenda in various countries, in Uganda, in the Balkans. It's not something to argue or not argue. These are what they've come out with. These are numbers that they've come out with. We've spent a lot of these expenses that we're seeing are towards this woke agenda that's been being pushed. And I don't care if you're making an argument of it's coming through Congress or what. There's an agenda that's being pushed. And what I like most about this is that there's transparency that is being shown. And if there's transparency being shown that there's some things that are going towards, expenses that liberals would say conservatives shouldn't be doing, Americans want to see that transparency as well. But we live in a time of government where transparency is diminishing. And I think their big goal in all this is to inform Americans where our money truly is going to.
And Micah, is Trump violating the Constitution, as Adam claims?
Well, no, and a question I wanted to ask Adam is, so is your claim that Congress is budgeting and saying, hey, we are going to give like $1.5 million for DEI programs in Serbia? Is that your claim? That Congress signed a bill that specifically said we are going to do $1.5 million for DEI programs in Serbia?
My claim is that there's going to be a lot of grants that are insignificant in the broader scheme of federal spending that are going to be part of negotiating in Congress, whether that's left to the discretion of the agencies to determine which exact things they're going towards, or they're specified.
Well, that's a yes or no question. It's a yes or no question.
Program. It depends on the program in question.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. So that's where Congress gives money to specific programs, and then within the programs, the executive branch can determine how much money goes to what or where it goes specifically. And so if you're going to set up a bureaucracy of executive programs, for a president who's the head of the executive branch to say, hey, we're going to cut this specific funding in this program, and we're not going to have it go over here. We're going to have it go over here or something like that. That is totally within his constitutional power and authority.
Not according to the judge that's ruled against him in court and that he's now defying. And again, there is a difference between changing, like there's some discretion the executive branch does have in how funds are spent, but that depends a lot on the legislation in question and how much authority or discretion has been given to them. And again, it's one thing to move funds around. Just freezing funds fully and revoking the discretion of these agencies to make these decisions when they have career civil servants with civil service protections is a very different question.
Do you think that's permanent though? Like, do you think the freezing of funds is permanent, or is it, hey, let's stop spending money and let's make sure that we're spending it efficiently, and then let's get back on track?
It doesn't matter if it's permanent or not. It's a matter if you have the authority to do this in the first place.
No, it absolutely does matter whether it's permanent or not.
Because
Congress gives a specific amount of money for a program. And so if you're saying, hey, we're going to stop spending money for the time being, but then spend the rest of the money the rest of the year, I don't see how that violates anything Congress has passed.
I mean, again, you can read the court's decision on this. This is very clear civics that the president does not have this power. The OMB memo had to be rescinded. They kept freezing funds. And again, this is not a small thing that Trump is defying court orders. This has never happened in modern American history. You can try to defend it if you want, but I mean,
come on, that's ridiculous. Biden did the exact same thing, especially when it came.
Because that's
exactly with student loans.
No, Biden tried to use the HEROES Act to forgive student loan debt. The Supreme Court said no, and he said, okay, I'll try a different way. That's judicial review. What's not judicial review is to just outright defy a court's ruling.
Is that what he's doing, Micah? Is Trump going against the court's ruling?
Yeah, the judge himself said, you guys can Google this today.
Well, and I mean, this is where we are only 20 days into the presidency. And so, we'll see if this gets challenged in court. This is a fresh ruling. So, we can't treat it like it's an established ruling that's going to stand for the rest of time.
Well, it doesn't matter how early you are into administration. If you see the warning signs of somebody that's acting without of their jurisdiction, that's already cause to stop.
Yeah, but there's debate on whether that is within their jurisdiction.
Right,
so,
but the pivot here I think is interesting when there's clear showing that this is not something within their own authority. Like, you can't just say, well, let's hope that the judge rules that it is within their authority. If there are warning signs that are already showing that people are extending past what they're allotted through the Constitution, that's already cause enough in order to pause that action.
No, I don't think that's necessarily true. And I mean, really, to get back to it, DOGE
challenge. Even if there are any sort of warnings that you're violating the Constitution, you should just go ahead and try it to see if you can get away with it. Is that really the argument that you're going with?
Okay, but it has been paused. Like, this stuff has been paused. So I'm not really sure what you're talking about when it comes to there. Yes, it has. I mean, again, this is so recent. You can't expect, an immediate pause. But going back to it, DOGE is, again, more of a transparency, kind of what Luke was saying, is a transparency type program that are giving recommendations to programs. The programs themselves are actually going to be the ones that implement these changes that DOGE recommends. And so I don't understand what's unconstitutional about that.
I mean,
The
it's great
president
for
has to
DOGE to
comply
come
with
in
all.
with like the idea or the guise of that we're going to add more transparency. But I'd like for DOGE to be more transparent with how much sensitive data that they're getting access to that are at risk of the American people. I mean, DOGE right now has sensitive financial data from the Treasury Secretary Scott Bensett, who said that they are already causing millions of jobs to be at risk because of the data that they're taking from people's personal finances. Like, when is this unelected bureaucracy that Trump and Elon have both been railing against suddenly get the authority to access millions of Americans' personal data that puts them at risk? That's not something that we should be advocating as a beneficial program.
Who's unelected? Trump was elected, and then Elon works for him, right?
No, these bureaucrats, the big thing of Trump trying to drain the swamp was getting rid of people who are in positions that are unelected or unaccountable to the American people. We're not saying that Trump isn't elected. Obviously, he won. But people like Elon and his 25-year-old boys that he's bringing in, like these are not people that have any accountability from the American
Elon
people.
works for
For
Trump.
legal right.
Elon works for Trump, right?
And that's hilarious that you're saying that you have a concern with DOGE not being accountable to the American people, yet the programs that they're investigating are giant bureaucracies that have no accountability to the American people. I mean, if you're going to apply that argument to DOGE, please go ahead and apply it to the rest of the programs within the federal government.
Thoughts, Adam? Or
I mean, again,
I kind of just had a question for Adam.
Yeah.
You know, my biggest point on this, to be honest, is I try to approach things as how American people are going to see it.
Mhm.
Average American doesn't know half the stuff you guys are talking about. But what I do know is that the average
Contribution still
American
matters.
wants transparency. And so, the American people, we want our money to be going towards benefits that are things that will benefit our best interest as a country. Do you think it was in our best interest as a country to give $10 million for food supplies for terrorists associated with Al Qaeda? Do you think that was in our best interest?
The way you're framing that makes me very suspicious of the specifics of the case, so I'm not going to speak to that. I want to address what Jake was asking about earlier in regards to what you were saying.
You can't answer it.
When Congress,
we sent money.
so you're telling me there's like a bill that was passed to give terrorists, like, what are you saying?
So one of the expenses
I don't trust your recounting of this because MAGA's been lying about these programs
$10
in the
million
past week.
that we spent to go towards 4 meals for terrorists with direct association with Al Qaeda. That is not in America's best interest.
To the extent that terrorists are getting U.S. funds, obviously I oppose that. Obviously, no one is going to support that, obviously.
And
but
so that's what
the way
we're
these
pushing
things are
for
being
is
framed,
Micah and I want more transparency to the American.
Transparency is fine. That's not what's happening right now with DOGE. Because number one, a lot of these things are already in the public record. It's just that they're not like sexy. The mainstream media is not going to talk about like this $1.2 million grant going to this one country out of our, again, $6 trillion spending every year. Number two, I already said this in the beginning, if there's legitimate cases of waste, fraud, and abuse, cut them. Obviously, that's bipartisan. But again, and Mason agrees with me on this, this is all virtue signaling. And a lot of these programs are being framed in a way to be like red meat for the right. Like, look at this DEI, look at these terrorists. And it's like, when you actually read the fine print, it's never as straightforward or as negative as the right paints it out to be in a lot of cases. So I just find it dishonest.
Well, I mean, Adam, you made a lot of big sweeping claims there, but I didn't hear almost a single shred of evidence for any of that. What do you mean it's virtue signaling? To cut government waste is virtue signaling?
The types of programs that they're calling attention to and the way they're discussing them, the way they're inaccurately describing some of them, like the Politico thing, which was just for subscriptions for employees, like these things are being framed to paint a certain narrative that goes with the MAGA worldview. It's not a good faith effort. There's no Democrats that are part of this commission. Like, it's very clearly being done to basically like gin up support and raise tensions in the country.
So like how CNN and all these leftist media groups have been doing for years. I know we're talking about immigration, but why didn't they talk about all of the people that were murdered, the innocent individuals that were murdered by illegal immigrants? They didn't touch upon it. So they have their own agenda.
I mean, just because you didn't read it, I'm sure if you search it on CNN, you'll find a lot of these things in the news. Just because it didn't show up on your feed doesn't mean it didn't happen, right?
When a 2-year-old boy is innocently murdered by an illegal immigrant, that should be the headline of the day on CNN. It wasn't mentioned once.
It should be
So
the
I don't
headline
wanna
of the
hear
day,
this
no
person
matter
who's
what else
still
has
going.
happened in the world. Like, there's no editorial discretion with media.
What?
Editorial discretion.
That's irrelevant
I'm
actually to
saying
Luke's
is
point,
they're
because Luke's
pushing
point is that
ridiculous
it didn't show up at all.
Yeah,
There's no article written about this whatsoever.
but honestly, an article
That's
doesn't cut it because
okay. So now we're
something
shifting
like
the
that.
goalpost.
Okay,
Because
but
they don't
I think
wanna
you're
they
showing
don't
your
wanna
own hand
talk
right now, Luke,
they
by
don't wanna
saying that
talk
you want
about it because
prioritized
it's
in the
gonna
mainstream
show and it's
media
gonna
are people
expose
that
the
are not
truth of
coming
what's
from this
going
country.
on.
Like you're showing what you're prioritizing as far as what you want
The
specifically
safety of
highlighted.
American people, yeah, that's what I'm prioritizing.
No, nobody's saying that the safety of the American people shouldn't be prioritized, but you're saying one of the top stories should be somebody not from this country has done a crime within the United States.
Has murdered an innocent citizen of our country, yes.
Yes, we're not saying that the murder is justified or the murder shouldn't have been reported on. To Adam's point, it was reported on, but you saying that this should be in like the focal point of the mainstream media or on television networks shows that you only want those instances prioritized. There are going to be millions of murders that happen in America. That's not discounting the seriousness of any of them, but you're not going to be able to put this on prime time, every single murder that happens in the United States.
The reason they don't expose it is because it's going to go against the agenda they're pushing.
No person who's in favor of more migration says that immigrants don't commit crimes. I've never met one of those persons.
At the end of the day, murders happen every day, but at the end of the day, this is happening because of some individual that shouldn't be there.
Luke, wouldn't you say that we would see these reflected within? Do you believe in law enforcement? Are you a big black the blue guy?
Yeah.
Okay, law enforcement has shown that not even on average, statistically, there are more proportional crimes committed by natural-born American citizens than people who come from other countries.
Yeah, and that's the point we hear from the left all the time. And
as a true point. Yeah, we're going to keep saying it.
As unfair as this sounds, those people who are committing these murders that are Americans, they are Americans legally, at least. That doesn't discount the fact of the murder, but they are here legally. They should, of course, you report.
Yeah, I'm going to tell the victim's parents that, at least you were killed by an American citizen. Can you be proud of that? At least it wasn't someone from a different nation.
Let's get back on topic for a second. I want to sorry to pick on you guys, Mason and Adam, but I think on principle, you guys are on board with transparency and cutting waste. I know that you're attributing bad motives. I know that you're attributing bad motives to Elon Musk and Donald Trump. You're saying it's virtue signaling. You're saying you're doing it illegally. Humor me and just put aside whether he's violating the Constitution. Don't you agree with Micah and Luke that it's good to cut funding to terrorist groups, that it's good to cut funding when it's wasteful, even if it's only 1% of the GDP?
If that's the premise of the question, that it's by definition wasteful spending that's going to terrorists, then obviously, yeah. But I would take issue with, like, how are these programs being described? When he says we're giving terrorists food, am I going to pull this article up later and find out that, like, we sent money to some charity and then one person in that charity, his, like, uncle was part of the Taliban for, like, a month? Like, I'm not saying that's the case, but, like, these things are complicated and it's very easy to paint broad narratives that fit in line with, like, a certain ideology. All I'm saying is that these things are not as straightforward as they seem on the surface. Again, I'd reference the Politico example. And then also, if you want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, when we spend $6 trillion, sure, like, even if we're wasting $1, cut it. But when we're talking about prioritizing things, when Elon Musk's big, like, magnum opus is like a few $1 million here and there, it makes me question how he's going to get to the $2 trillion he was talking about when, again, our entire discretionary budget is $1.7 trillion.
Yeah, and neither Adam or I are against cutting, again, where things are wasteful. But Luke coming into this conversation talking about Hamas getting condoms is proof in itself that this agency is exactly for theater. This is for riling up people that are already predisposed to fear tactics and getting people to challenge programs that aren't even in existence. Can you point to me the executive order that authorized condoms for Hamas, Luke? Or are you just saying what you saw in an Elon Musk tweet?
Frankly, any money that went to Hamas is too much.
Yeah, where did it go to Hamas? Like, that's my question here. What's the specific executive order that authorized Hamas?
That question's already flawed because it's not an executive order; it's a program.
Where's
it's
the
USAID?
Can you point to that then, Mike?
USAID.
USAID. Do you know where they gave contraceptions? To Jordan. This wasn't to Hamas. This wasn't even to people within that region.
Okay. Either way,
it does. How is America's best interest in that?
$46,000. I spent more on that on a vehicle.
But
this is not something that should be.
How is that benefiting Americans?
But do you see how you're prioritizing that one specific example? Like to what Adam said, this is pennies that are given. If you want to take on government spending, you should be advocating for Social Security cuts and Medicare cuts. Why isn't Trump touting that? because he knows that it's poison politically?
Let me speak to that. So if you're Elon Musk and Donald Trump and you want to cut a bunch of money, what are you going to do? You're going to go for the low-hanging fruit, the flashy stuff. It makes sense. You're
$46,000, Jake? Do you think that that's an adequate way to cut?
I don't know. I'm saying like
of a penny.
I want
$6 trillion.
And that's what Adam and I are saying is sure, that cut that 46,000, but the only reason why it was prioritized is for political theatrics. It's to get people like Luke fired up saying, oh my God, did you hear that they're having gay sex in Hamas? And we're promoting that with our budget? Like, this is not something that's beneficial towards any...
If it doesn't benefit the overarching American people, we should have it.
But Mason, it doesn't make the cut wrong. Right? Let me grant you that it was theatrical. It doesn't make it wrong to cut it.
It'll kill them to ever give any credit to this administration.
No, I'm saying
I want Donald Trump to succeed. I live in a country that is under his authority. Why would I be advocating for the country's worst interests? What I'm saying is the focus of these theatrics is specifically shows what their interests and their intents are. I'm not saying that we shouldn't cut it. Sure, I'll grant you. Let's cut it. But I'm saying the reason why we're talking about it right now is by design. It's to get us talking about Hamas condoms and not about the wasteful spending that goes into our U.S. military.
And also,
or Trump wanting to annex Gaza. Talk about government spending. Oh my God!
No, we're in favor of that. That's the thing. Is we're okay with going through the Pentagon, going through the military, and cutting wasteful spending. We're all for that.
I love that.
But the problem is we have these other programs that are clearly wasting money. And you guys are bringing it up like it's like an issue.
46,000.
Okay, Mason. It's one that's
like human rights, and then USA determine which grants that money is going to go to. But that money is already delegated to like the broad umbrella term of like human development programs in foreign countries. You might have a problem with Congress doing that, but again, like the way this is being painted out is like, this is the deep state. They're spending money behind your back. You have no idea about it. Trump is going in and him and Elon Musk are saving the country. In reality, Congress is complicated. The bureaucracy is complicated. These things are never as simple as they seem. And if you want to fix them, you go through the legislature. You don't violate the Constitution.
You're not violating the Constitution.
So Mike is saying it's not.
I'm sorry, it is.
No, it's not.
Why not?
Have you even read the judge's decision today?
No, it literally came out today. I'm sorry, I don't do this full time.
Fair enough, but then why are you taking a stance on it if you haven't read it?
Because these programs themselves are unconstitutional. I mean, the U.S. Constitution, it doesn't authorize the federal government to loan or grant money to anyone. So, these programs themselves are unconstitutional.
But in other countries,
what?
Congress does pass funds that are meant for like human development in other countries. The USAID might have discretion on which grants specifically.
Yeah, but is that in the Constitution? Your claim is specifically, is it constitutional?
The legislature appropriates funds, yes. Power of the purse. It's like Civics 101. And this is, again, you're saying that like this is allowed. It should be fine. What the judge said is, I'm putting a restraining order on this freeze. You can't freeze anything. Let's hear the case. If Trump wins on the merits of the case, great. But that hasn't happened yet. And in the meantime, the executive branch has to comply with the courts. If like this is by definition dictatorial. By definition.
It's by definition dictatorial.
For the executive branch to ignore checks and balances, yes.
Are they ignoring them, Micah?
Well, I don't know. You're saying that this court ruling came out literally today. So I don't understand how you can say that it's already dictatorial when it just came out today.
There were already 2 rulings made where they said you have to comply with this. The Trump administration and the OMB had until Friday to prove compliance. The funds are still frozen despite the restraining order. So today the judge said we gave them like a week to do this and they're not complying with the court order.
Yeah, I just don't know the details of the court order, so it's hard to respond specifically to that. But
it's been up 30 minutes. Let's move to DEI.